Hello, everyone. We are here in another session of Happiness in Latin America. We are going to be talking about different issues in the region. We are going to start with Adam, who is going to present a study of comparison between happiness in Colombia and Mexico. Then we are moving to Mina Lyons, who is going to present Bystanders in Discrimination, links to quality of life, happiness, and well-being. And lastly, we will have from Brazil, Douglas Pereira, and his co-author, and is going to be talking about happiness in Latin America, trends and challenges in research. We will have about 15 minutes for each presentation, 15 something, to leave some space for questions, okay? So, Mr. Adam.
All right, so comparing Colombia and Mexico in terms of happiness. What is, I think, new here and innovative is the use of the large-scale data. So both for Colombia and for Mexico, we have very large administrative, and by that I mean collected by governments, data sets. They are kind of like similar to United States birthplace data. We have a lot of observations, right? So there is tens of thousands of observations per country. Especially in Colombia, it's about 250,000 per year, right? So that's what's unique, and that's what makes it great data. There are also hundreds of variables across several modules. And at the same time, it seems not used in the academic research. There are some government reports, but I haven't seen any research using those data, right? So I think it's a great opportunity here for research using those data. The limitation is that if we want to compare two countries like I do here today, Mexico and Colombia, the questions are not exactly the same. The wording of the survey items is slightly different, so it may be better just to use it within country as opposed to cross-country. So these are the data that I'll be using today. For Colombia, it's, I'm going to speak Spanish now, Encuesta Nacional de Calidad de Vida, or ECV for short. It's collected by the country's statistical department, DANE, and we use 2021. For Colombia, there are data, I think, going back to like 2004 or something like that, and we have those every year. So again, it's a great source. For Mexico, there is a little bit less data. There is one in 2021. There is also one in 2024, but it's not as much as for Colombia. And I also have some bar charts, so I will go by flags here, and I will use yellow for Colombia and green for Mexico. All right, so here are the survey items. For a quick comparison, right? So for life satisfaction, we have these two items. The first one is for Colombia, the second one is for Mexico. They're very similar, but they are not exactly the same. They're both on scale from 0 to 10. There's also country ladder, and there is much more. There is about, there's over 10 questions on quality of life, subjective well-being in each country. I will use several here that are very similar, but there is over 10 or even over 20. And that was like a question to audience, like, do you guys think that they are close enough that we can compare them, we can contrast the answers to those questions, or are they quite different? So we can maybe discuss that.
I think, especially the first one, I think it's pretty much the same.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
there's not much.
Scale, the Likert scale, but I would be happy to compare it.
Yeah, so that was my first impression. And again, what I do here, I will be comparing Colombia to Mexico, but you can also do it within country, right? So you don't have to do it in a comparative mode, you can do it within country if they are too different. All right, so that's the first one, just life satisfaction country ladder. By those two measures, Mexico is a little bit happier, right? So the green bar for Mexico on the first one is a little bit higher at over 8, whereas Colombia is around 8, and so it is for country ladder. Now, this is where it gets interesting. There are those domain satisfactions, right? So here we can actually look at different domains. So it's not just overall life satisfaction, but it's also different domains. On health, the first panel, again, Mexico is happier. The second one is, I think, one of the most interesting. It's public safety or safety. So here the question was a little bit different. In Mexico, it was about public safety. In Colombia, it was about safety, right? But this is the only domain where actually Colombia is higher, right? And I think it makes sense. Like oftentimes Colombia is demonized, that it's dangerous, Pablo Escobar, narco trafficking. But it seems that actually Mexico these days is more dangerous. And that's what we see here, that Colombians are actually more satisfied with safety, public safety, than Mexicans. Here we have work activity satisfaction in the first panel at the top. This is where the biggest difference is. So Mexico is much, much higher than Colombia. So Mexicans enjoy their work much more than Colombians do. And the difference is big. It's over 1, like 1.5. Related questions about labor. So Mexicans have higher free time satisfaction and also higher standard of living or income satisfaction. There's also quite a bit of difference. The last one would make sense. There is higher income in Mexico, also in purchasing power parity standards, so that would be reflected in objective data. All right, and here I'm going to have a couple graphs by male, female, and over age groups. And these are, I think, quite interesting. So again, green is for Mexico, yellow is for Colombia. The solid line is for male, the dashed line is for female. So again, Mexicans are happier, but over across age groups. So the first one is 18-27, 28-37, 38-47, 48-57, 58-64, 65 plus. Older people are less happy in Mexico, both male and female. In Colombia, a little bit, but not so much, right? So there's bigger decline in happiness, life satisfaction across age groups in Mexico. Also, there is a gender gap in Mexico. Males are happier, and it's quite a big difference, about 0.2, right? The gap closes for oldest folks, 65 plus. But other than that, there is this gender gap in Mexico. There is none in Colombia. I think it's interesting. Now we have depression. Both countries higher for females, but again, it's right. So here, the higher the value, the worse. It's depression on the y-axis. There is a gap. There is a gender gap in Mexico, but not in Colombia. So Mexican women are more depressed than Mexican males. Right. So that may point to maybe some differences. That maybe Colombia is more women-friendly than Mexico. So I just grabbed some quick stats here. So this is difference in median earnings. It's 11% across male-female in Mexico. in Colombia, it's pretty much the same. So in Mexico, males make more than females, 11%. In Colombia, there's no difference. This one is interesting. This is extra leisure time enjoyed by men compared to women. Right, so the most man-friendly countries, Italy and then Poland, but also Mexico. In these countries, men enjoy more free time than women. And they have Colombia here, but Mexico is pretty high, right? And again, with the wages as well. And the last exercise I have here is overall life satisfaction as a function of domain satisfaction. So I'm following classic Campbell's book here, The Quality of American Life, where he framed the discussion of life satisfaction in terms of domains. Right, so we have health, we have family, we have security, and so on. So what I do here, I regress overall life satisfaction on domain satisfactions to see which domain satisfaction has greater impact for overall life satisfaction between Mexico and Colombia. And there are some interesting findings here. So the first one is that health, the first variable here, again, green is for Mexico, yellow for Colombia, that health seems to matter more in Colombia for overall life satisfaction. But income is much higher in Mexico than Colombia. And these are big differences, right? It's like 0.1 versus 0.3 on income. On health, it's smaller, but it's still quite large, like 0.17 in Mexico versus 0.27 in Colombia, right? So what this shows is that there are different domains, there are different life domains that matter for overall life satisfaction in Mexico and Colombia. Safety and security, I think it's really interesting. Again, if you recall from earlier, that was the only dimension where Colombia wins, right? So Colombians are more satisfied with safety and security than Mexicans. But what's maybe even more interesting is that safety security doesn't seem to matter for overall life satisfaction in Mexico. Right? So Mexicans are not happy about safety security, but at the same time, satisfaction with safety security in Mexico does not really predict much of overall life satisfaction, whereas it does in Colombia more so. Right? So I think that's like really interesting result. I don't know why is that so. Maybe to some degree, people in Mexico got used to violence. That would be question to audience, but I thought it was interesting result. And then, as I'm a geographer, I always like to put things on a map. I've made a map here of happiness in Colombia, and what's great with those data is that we have 250,000 observations. So we can have a couple thousand per province. And there are indeed big differences across Colombia. They are of about 1. Right? So it goes from 7.4 here in Nariño and also in eastern provinces here to as high as 8.4 here. Right, so there are really big differences in happiness across Colombian provinces. Some of the happiest places in Colombia is so-called cafetero. That's where Lina comes from. We also have data by city, right? So this is great. We have, and it's just one wave. I can get a couple thousand people if I pull a couple waves together. So we have about 500 or more people per city. So again, the Cafetero region wins. Armenia, Manizales, Pereira, all three are in Cafetero region. They are very happy at about 8.5, 8.4. Medellin, the second biggest city, is also quite happy. Cartagena, I don't know why it's so happy.
They have the Caribbean Sea,
Yeah, but it's like expensive. It's like Miami. It's not. Maybe like most unexpected one would be Cucuta. It's close to Venezuela. There are lots of challenges there, but still it's quite happy. Cali, less happy. Bogota, less happy. And then at the bottom, Pasto, where I lived for some time, it's quite unhappy here. I don't know why that would be the case, but yeah, like what I think is really great here is that we can get city-level data from administrative data, and I haven't seen that done in Latin America yet. So I think that's what makes those data really useful. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I don't have any comments since I am author of the paper. But I don't know, I'll open the floor for comments.
Yeah, I have a... So, do you also, or do they also collect information on things like ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender identity? And is it possible to disaggregate the data to look at how happiness looks like disaggregated by ethnicity, for example, or sexual orientation?
I'm still quite new to those data, but there is just about anything. There is for sure ethnicity. So there is breakdown whether a person is indigenous, whether it's black, whether it's of European descent. There's a breakdown whether a person is farming, whether it's in indigenous community. I'm pretty sure sexual orientation will be there too. There are hundreds of variables, different modules. It's really, really great data.
Yes, just for the case of Mexico, I think it would be interesting because I've been working also with MDR and having like a similar map that you did. It's very interesting because also for Mexico, I think it follows a lot of poverty incidents in the states of Mexico. It's some sort of kind of the influence I think on it. And one thing that we also found a bit interesting is the perception of security. And I pretty much believe that is something related to the thing you said. Because in Mexico we're used to violence, but also because violence has been changing. It's not I'm not very familiar with the context of Colombia, but I think it stayed like in a specific region for a lot of time. And Mexico has been evolving in the last 20 years. But this started from the north, now it's going. So we are aware of this, but in some sense we're not permanent in that situation. So I think that might explain a little bit why this change. And very nice.
Thank you.
Someone else? Do you have a comment? Will you raise your hand? No. Okay. Someone else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Adam. Now
So I'm talking about harassment and violence that's based on gender, maybe gender identity, LGBTQ membership, race, ethnicity, and so on. So it's quite special type of violence. And we've been really lucky in the past years to receive some funding for different projects. So we've done some research in racism in the university in Finland from the perspective of bystanders with the Kone Foundation, you know, the company that builds all the elevators. So they also give money to research. And also we did a project in Guatemala looking at sexual violence in universities with funding from British Academy, developed some intervention materials in form of short films as well. And we also got funding from the Medical Society in the UK to establish a network of Red Latinoamericana de Espectadores contra el Acoso, which also allowed us to collect some pilot data. So what I'm talking about today is I've reanalyzed some of these data from these projects, and I'm also going to talk about data that has not been yet published. And I've got these inspirational quotes like splattered in the presentation as well from people who have inspired me. So just really quickly, I'm going to introduce the role of bystanders in bias-based discrimination, then maybe link that to a bit quality of life perspectives. And I've got a confession to make. I'm really not a quality of life researcher at all. So I'm not here just to disseminate findings, but I'm hoping that I could learn new perspectives from you guys. And also, I'm going to present the samples, many samples, really quickly that the analysis is based on, and then show the reanalysis of existing qualitative data. Maybe we have time for some discussions, hopefully at the end, but let's see. I'll try to speed up and not be too slow. So just to have a bit of context, by the way, this is done by my child, Lenny. When I started looking for AI-generated pictures to have in the presentations, they just felt so soulless and, I don't know, a bit creepy. So I asked my child to do some drawings. So as you can see, they are totally imperfect, but you know, they are quite cute. So this is one of the situations that bystanders often could find themselves in. It's a case of street harassment based on sexual orientation. So there's a couple walking down the street, and then these skinheady looking characters are starting to verbally abuse them. There are bystanders. There's the guy on the right hand side. He's actually thinking in Finnish. He's saying, "Oh, this is scary." The woman at the back with the big long hands is saying that I don't know what to do. And then there's a girl at the back who's saying, well, I don't actually even care. So bystanders, when they find themselves in these kind of situations, there could be several different feelings, emotions, barriers to their help that they experience. And imagine that this is just one of the many types of discriminative, violent situations that people face. You know, there could be differences in whether the violence is experienced within families, workplace, university, school, church. Like there are so many different contexts and types of violence. So this is just to put things in a bit of a context of the complexity of the topic that I'm trying to research as well, because there's so much to it. It honestly is like a lifetime of investigating this topic. So more to the complexity here is that it functions on multiple different levels, from individuals to their relationships with others, and then it also influences communities and societies, what bystanders do or don't do. So Victoria Banyard used the socio-ecological model to construct a model of prevention using bystanders. And the quote is from Geraldine Su, who studies racism in the United States, but it can be adapted to other contexts as well. It shows how everyday interventions of allies and well-intentioned bystanders have a profound positive effect. It creates inclusive and welcoming environment, discourages negative behavior, and reinforces a norm that values respectful interactions. So I think that's massively related to quality of life. But I have no idea if quality of life research has been linked to hate crimes and bias-based violence and the role of bystanders. I tried to look for papers, but I actually couldn't find them, so I don't know. You might know more about this. But it functions at many different levels. So there has been large, huge, massive body of research on bystanders. Most studies have looked at barriers and facilitators to help and the intervention effectiveness. So when people are trained, are they then more likely to help? And also what bystanders do in situations. Most of the research is in the context of school or cyberbullying or sexual and relationship violence. Most studies are in the English-speaking global North countries. And there's not that much on bias-based discrimination, hate crimes, relating the results to quality of life indicators. I could not find many studies at all. So I was really surprised to find when I started looking at bystander literature, I think it was in 2019, that there are massive gaps We don't know much about things like street harassment, for example. There are currently 5 or 6 studies looking at street harassment from bystander perspective. Can you imagine? And there's thousands of studies on things like sexual harassment in universities. So just quickly, there are a few studies that look at the outcome of what happens when bystanders do help. What is the impact on the targets of violence? What is the impact to the bystanders themselves? So it seems like when bystanders do something successfully, and they need to do it successfully so that it has a positive outcome, mental health-wise, it has got a positive influence in the targets of the violence and also the bystanders themselves. But most, if not all, of the studies have looked at sexual and dating violence, and all of these are in the context of United States as well. So there's a massive gap looking at other types of violence, and also not that many qualitative methods. So just to enter into the world of some of the studies that we did. So there's a drawing of Lenny. Again, we didn't use this drawing in the research, by the way, we used this vignette. So it's a common experience for people who, oh my God, 5 minutes, to like be followed in the shops based on their racialized identities. And we used in the studies these kind of vignettes to ask people then about their experiences as potential bystanders. Okay, we'll skip that. So then what I did was that I reanalyzed some of the findings of qualitative research. Here are some of the studies in Guatemala, Colombia, Brazil and Finland. And then I tried to link these findings to emotions that could be potentially relevant to quality of life indicators of emotions that are positive. And just setting the context, all of the participants, so we are talking about thousands of participants in many different studies, they said that bystanders don't do much, they just don't seem to care. And I constructed 4 themes based on the qualitative responses, and some of them are about emotions as a barrier to help, emotions as a facilitator to help, bystander emotions when they do or do not help, and targets emotions when they do or do not help. So I knew that I'm going to do this, like just spend all the time in the beginning of the presentation and then rush through the results. Some examples for emotions as a barrier to help. So bystanders feel helpless, and that means that they don't help. They can go into a bit of a shock and disbelief, and also feel stunned. And these are emotions that make bystanders less likely to do something. They also feel embarrassed, and they feel fear and shame. And that could be something that stops them from helping. So I haven't got time to actually show you these citations or quotes, but they are from Colombia, Brazil, Poland, Finland, UK. And then people are also have got emotions that facilitate help. If they feel disgusted, furious, anger, indignation, justice, rage and anger, they are more likely to take action and do something. And then I'll just jump through that. So then we also asked targets of violence, how do they feel when bystanders do something or don't do something. And in Finland, in the interviews, people racialized as black said that it feels nice. It feels like you are not alone when bystanders do something. And then mostly people talked about what happens when bystanders don't help them. And it makes the targets of violence feel scared and vulnerable. They feel alone. They feel silent and shocked and angry and powerless. And uncomfortable, upset and sad. So unfortunately I didn't have time to go through these quotes, but if anybody wants a copy of the presentation, I'm happy to share it later. So just quick conclusion. So it's an incomplete horse. because the backside is really quite elaborate. We know a lot about bystanders and facilitators and barriers to help. And then I think our research here has maybe contributed to one of the front legs to the horse a little bit by showing what kind of emotions are important. And maybe in future interventions we could target those kind of emotions to facilitate bystanders, help them to intervene when it's needed. And then acknowledgement. I've got friends collaborators who also are friends from this. This is my team from Bogota, from Colombia, Bogota mainly, and Guatemala and Brazil and United Kingdom. And then, thank you. So like that, it was a bit rushed with the results, but I don't know if there's any time to have any questions or like any comments. Like I'd really appreciate any insights.
Very interesting. I would like to know how is the methodology for doing research on bystanders. I mean, how do you approach that? Do you have anthropologists who observe the dynamics in societies? How is that done?
So yeah, because I had to jump through the results, so I couldn't quite show like how we did our studies. But we basically used vignettes where we had some stories of different types of violence that were constructed together in collaboration with people who have been the targets of this type of violence. And then we ask people questions about the stories, and then we also have some quantitative data that I haven't used here. We also have interviews and focus groups. And I think when you said, are there some kind of observations, that would be amazing. Like I think that like we need to step up the methodological challenges and use more diverse methods as well, and observational data, maybe some, I don't know, like I've seen a lot of mapping type of stuff here as well in the presentation. So some kind of like maps and yeah. So if anybody has got ideas for methods, I'd be really welcoming of those.
Okay. Here and there?
Yeah. I'm curious to know what you think after this journey, this research, because you mentioned at the beginning that there might be maybe disciplinary barriers that you didn't find much about bystanders in qualitative life studies. Why do you think that? What is your impression about this? This separation?
So I think the journey has been really interesting, and I know that I know less all the time and I can recognize the gaps. I think it's because we don't listen to the voices of the marginalized people themselves who are targets of violence. So that's why a lot of the bystander literature ignores the perspectives of those who have been targets. Researchers don't ask, or we need also people with those identities to lead the research, because who we are as individuals and our places in society directs the type of research that we do and the questions that we ask. So I've learned to reflect, and I'm trying to ask the questions from the people who are targets of violence as well, and include people in the research team to learn a little bit more and see things differently. So I think that's why, because we don't have enough people as researchers who would ask the correct type of questions. But yeah, the gaps are massive.
Perfect, thank you.
Very interesting research. Just a comment regarding information. I think for Mexico we have these 3 surveys. One is the one of Enviare, that is about well-being. We have another one that is for discrimination, that has been done for several years. So ask people that suffer discrimination, and also one that is specifically for LGBTQ people community. And it's done by the Institute of National Statistics of Mexico, and it has been done for one time, and I think they're going to publish the new one this year. So maybe it can be helpful. I'm not sure about it has information for bystanders, but for sure it's for violence and discrimination that might be useful for your research.
That sounds really interesting. And I think in a lot of like national and international surveys, there are questions about lived experiences of violence, but there are often no questions about, well, what did the bystanders do in these circumstances and how did you feel if they did something or didn't do something? It would be really interesting to see if there's anything about the presence of others in the experiences of violence.
I want to say to you if you are interested in this information to check if they have questions related to this.
Yeah.
Someone else?
Just wanted to say that I love the drawings.
And Maria Isabel?
Yeah, very, very interesting. And I have a question. Are there some differentials about the themes that you showed or the emotions? And if you describe the type of violence, for example?
Yeah. So, sorry, could you say the last part of the question? I've got a. So I have to make another confession. I'm a bit half deaf, so that's why I'm liking when there's microphones in the room because I can't always hear well.
It's okay. Maybe you could apply some differentiations if you discriminated violence and the results could change, or something you can discover something common or different if you decide to discriminate the type of violence?
So like the type of violence that is, yes. So that would be interesting because like there's so many different types of violence as well that people potentially experience and we don't know about that either. Whether it's some kind of a microaggression that's almost like not visible and what do bystanders do then? And do the targets of the violence even want the help of the bystanders? You know, that is another question. And or if it's really obvious and like obvious violence and if it's violence in the family or like, you know, what the context is. So I think that's what I mean about like there should be so many more studies because we don't know, like it is, and it's surprising, but it really is a huge question mark. And that's a really good comment about the types and who's doing the discrimination and yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're
Hi everyone, good morning. So let's start with this happiness in Latin America, trends and challenges in research. I have done this with my colleague Luciano Suebricker. So let me start with the simple question. So what is happiness? So we are talking about this and the well-being. And happiness is an achievement or a feeling or a state. Probably depends who are answering. Actually, probably who are asking for about this. Actually, we start this debate. We think that there are two ways to answer this question. The first one is assuming what happiness is. For example, happiness is life satisfaction, or happiness is subjective well-being, or even happiness is well-being. As life satisfaction and subject well-being, it's very common perspective in psychology, and well, happiness is a well-being. So very usually, and in the old papers and economies, but it's a great area about this, distinguish about these words, and in the word that meaning, the word meaning, the meaning matters. So the second way to answer this is asking people what happiness for them and what they think. It's a little bit in line with the yesterday we heard about etiquette and amic research. So, but when we're asking about people about their impression, their perspective about happiness, I think so we think a little bit more longer. Let's step back and take a while and look into our histories and talking about happiness and how we want to live in Ostend. We have to go back than the ancient Greek. So I think so this start with this kind of question. And the world that living with the myths and the tragical view of the life, Socrates was the first one to stand at asking, so how should we live? And this a broke of the paradoxes. It is, okay, let's the gods and their places, and let's assuming our places in the earth. So how should we live in searching for our ethos or for ethic forward? And he started with this, and came Plato after, and Aristotle with the perspective of daimonia, and the best, looking for the best life as possible, and the daimonia as a totally investment for the human being to be the better we can be. After then we have Epicure with the perspective about aponia, that the life without pain, and ataraxia is imperturbability of the soul. These three authors, these three philosophers, start to understand how we can live, but we cannot separate these thinkers for the time and the context that they live. They live in another places, in another context with war, with democracy and decreasing. So we have to think that they have an idea about happiness, but we move beyond. So in the line of, now this is a quick brief story about happiness research. We think we have thinkers, philosophies, economists, even when the time that the happiness was captured by the church, by the religions and the Middle Age, we have centuries trying to understand how should we live. So in the beginning, our century, now we have a variety, because sometimes we're talking about happiness in one field, and one field have another perspective. We have a paper that assuming happiness is something, in another fields have another definition. So the point is, nowadays, what's beginning with Socrates and the Occident, we have some common measures that trying to understand happiness, and the winners are Cantor ladder and the satisfaction with life scale, and even all things concern how satisfy your life. It's a kind of instrument that trying to understand happiness using one single question. This is interesting because we move beyond impression, but probably we have to think a little more on what the data cannot tell to us to understand happiness in different places. So we're looking for the World Happiness Report, for example. We have the first 10 countries. They answer this question about Cantor ladder and so. And assuming that this is happiness. But when we looking, for example, the Human Development Index for the first 10 countries, we can see that 50% of the countries that in the Human Development Index are the same in the World Happiness Report. If you consider the first 30 countries in the Human Development Index, we will find that 80% of the countries of the top 10 in Happiness Report will be there. So we are really investigating happiness or something else. Because when you're talking about happiness, we have to take into account that the meaning of this word have the people and the culture and story and the places. For example, in Brazil, we have a perspective about happiness. The definition of happiness is quite different from, for example, in Argentina. In Brazil, we have two kind of definitions. Happiness is a kind of happy or joyful events or situation, and lucky or success. In Argentina, it's a country beside us. Has a kind of definition. It's state of mind one who enjoys what one desires: satisfaction, joy, and contentment. So when we're talking about happiness, I think so we have to take into account what people understand when we are talking about happiness. For example, when you asking for lay people to define happiness, we will find different perspective. In the study with 16 countries, almost 3,000 participants, we found that the perspective of happiness, when people are allowed to write, to define in your own words, will have psychological definitions, It's most of kind of group where answers that the people share some feelings or impressions, but belong to them. And kind of macro categories associate with family, relations, health, or daily life situation. And inside these psychological definitions, we will find some kind of words, for example, be in harmony or inner balance, or be satisfied, for example. Satisfaction, it belongs to the perspective of happiness, but not only satisfaction. We have the kind of optimism, we have the kind of positive emotion, positive states. When we look at the country, for example, the countries, when trying to understand how these perspectives and definitions move in country by country, we will see, for example, that Brazil have, in terms of macro categories, it's near foreign definitions about happiness related to relationships. And Argentina, it's a kind of more in psychological definitions. But looking to the psychological definitions of happiness, for example, we will find the definitions in the words from Brazilian people define happiness is more close to positive emotions. And Argentina, for example, the state of the awareness. And also we will find, for example, in the USA, if you see the map, it's more close to the perspective of satisfaction. So satisfaction, it's more close to the definition for people from the United States. This is very in line about the definition that they have in their own dictionary. So even when you're looking for the people in the same country, for example, looking under a group of professionals, when we ask people define happiness definition according to the job that they have, the work that they have done in the industry, or in this case in a school, we'll find some different perspective or different word association of happiness definitions. Almost seeing that very interesting that how people understand even work in the same place but in different role. Taking this account, I think so we start this question, how happiness has been investigated in Latin America and what are the current limitations and potential directions. So we start to a scoping review using Cielo and Lilacs database because we would like to understand how the production and studies have been done in Latin America. Not only the international paper or Europe papers, but we would like to understand how this information are circulating among us. And the keywords was happiness and well-being and well-being with slash, because we would like to capture the subject well-being that's very common in psychological field. For example, I'm a psychologist, I'm not an economist, so I come this background. So we'd like to check in psychology and economic and sociology fields that we use these kind of words, because sometimes well-being is interchangeable word as happiness, for example. We include peer-reviewed articles originate from the region, so we'd like to understand and really about Latin American, published between 2014 and 2024 in language, English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and work with the sample. We would like to use theoretical articles. So we excluded literature review, theoretical studies, and instrumental validation. Too many articles about psychometric properties. So it's interesting, it's quite interesting. You should go beyond this. So the results, we found 1,328 records identified, and remaining relevance was 231. So the database and the first pizza here, the databases, are the articles that you use in database to understand or collecting samples. So we have interesting. I thought that the most of the papers will be a kind of studies using database, but not. I was wrong. So 98% of the articles are made by people collecting data, and the sample, and it's a quite and a half. Sometimes a random sample, sometimes a specific sample, collecting with specific people. And about the temporality, you have a longitudinal, few studies almost 3% of these 231 articles, and cross-sectional is 97%. About the methods, we have 86% and using quantitative scales, and only 11% talking about using qualitative methods, that's interview or open-ended questions, and a few 3% using qualitative and quantitative mixed methods. And about the theme about happiness, we have almost a half. Sometimes the people asking and trying to understand happiness as a main topic of the article, sometimes using a different topic, a different construct. For example, optimism and gratitude using another concept to an investigation. So about the, oh no, I think so, I make something wrong here. But okay, it's not nice. This is a satisfaction with life. It is the PANAS category, the PANAS instruments, the positive and negative effects. So we have a bunch of other instruments and open-ended question, a specific question, but the amount, it's almost 30% of the studies using satisfaction with life, in 20% using at least PANAS. And about the samples, this is quite interesting because especially in psychology, you are very we are very, how can I say this? It's common to find articles that use only students as a sample, even in psychologists. So when we take a look for happiness studies in Latin America, you use adults, university students, and elderly, teenagers, and youth, and school students. It's a very interesting because we are moved beyond the university to collecting data. This is interesting. And trends and challenging. So we found this initial result, a conceptual polysemy, happiness meaning something different from each article, and the prevalence of cross-sectional studies, and the predominance of quantitative studies, and happiness is associated with the other concepts. But we have a diversity of samples. We are going beyond the university, we are looking the data, we are looking the people to asking people. It's very interesting in the paper from Latin America. We have a great opportunity for longitudinal studies, a space for more qualitative research, and the possibility of new exploratory models to understand how people in America Latina understand happiness. And to conclusion, this recognize these methodological and conceptual limitations, highlights the need for culturally sensitivity approaches and instruments capable of capturing the multiple meanings attributed to happiness in the region. And advancing in this direction may bridge the gap between scientific production and lived experience of Latin American populations, enriching both academic agenda and public debate of happiness. Since we started these ISQOLS, Graciela Tonon said in the first opening session about it's important to understand the meaning of the concept before starting to measure. And another session, Professor Fernando Longhi told about the geography is an important player, the actor of influence on the results. So I think so should we rethink in using the same plug for different types of sockets. Even we are interested to electricity. So to finish on the final reflections from John Chokey, it's a great statistician. It's better to have an approximate answer to the right question than to have an exactly answer to the wrong question. Thanks so much.
Questions, comments? Douglas, I was wondering when I was watching the presentation if there is something different in the literature you have revised for Latin America, if we have a different approach that you might find. You started in the presentation with definitions in different countries. Is there something that will be something characteristic of our region compared with other places?
About the answer, about the instruments?
About the answer.
about the answers. Yes, I thought that's a point interesting because when we look at this paper, we have in Latin America is more related to positive emotion, for example, about the answers. But the fact is I found just one paper from Europe that looking this data with using this comparison, and one single paper that asking the people, I think so was in Peru, asking people about their happiness definitions. So I think so we don't know. We still use the same scales to try to understand and the same concept. I think so we have an opportunity to understand what people understand to happiness. Probably before to using a measure. I think so measure is very interesting and important. But I think so we have a field to understand, that people understand what you're looking for, they are asking for.
No, I would like to comment. No? The first one, we have a paper that's 2006, and like 3 papers about the conceptual reference of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people have in mind. We ask them, actually we have data about that now from another source. We ask them about how happy you are, and then we ask them, what do you mean by that? But we give close responses based on the utterance. So we went to all philosophers and we identified like 8 big references for happiness. And then we ask people, which one of these? So it's not an open question, a closed question. And we can connect this with a philosophical school. Is this utilitarian? Is this satisfaction? Sure. Is this utopian? Happiness does not exist, and then you have Schopenhauer, no, and so on. And of course, there is heterogeneity. And with Joar Viterso, probably we ran the same survey in 3 countries: Cuba, Scandinavia, maybe Norway, and somewhere else, no. And we see differences, no. But that doesn't mean that happiness is not playing the same role. It's that the cognitive process that leads you to your experience of happiness may vary by countries. So, but there are papers, and also for Latin America, because that was for Mexico, and we show that the relationship with income and so on changes. That's 2006, 2007. We ran those, and now we have data, but we have many data now. So, but the survey is there, the options are there. You can link this with all the philosophers you have here, no? And then you have like an understanding of what people cognitively process, no? That's the first comment, no? And the second is more like to put this in perspective. No, probably 25 years ago, the issue was, can you trust people? Not really what kind of question you ask, but especially in economics and objectivity, the idea that science is about objectivity and not what people say, but about what people do, which is basically the economic perspective on preferences, no? Or from other movements, look at objective data. So the main issue was not what kind of question, no? Is should we accept what people say or not, no? And then the metrics issue was very difficult to convince national statistical offices. And now Mexico is measuring, but OECD is recommending. And now that everybody accepts that there is useful information in the report, of course, there is a whole area to get into what kind of question. No? But that's not like a challenge to the main epistemological assumption, which is people has the authority to judge their life. And that's what we have here. No? Now, of course, there are many groups studying what question, how they relate to objective indicators with other subjects, and that's part of the enrichment of the academic area. So it's welcome. This kind of research is highly welcome, no? But place it within the long trend of positioning subjectivity rather than objectivity in the metrics of whatever you want to call well-being, happiness, no? But also policy development. That's what we want. I think so. So it's highly welcome to do this kind of research.
Thanks so much.
Yes, just a question for the sample that you had of the papers.
Mm-hmm.
If you found like any specific concentration of countries analyzed and where people are analyzing it from, in terms of the authors, and for example, if it's not, I don't know, Brazil or Mexico were more predominant, or it was just even within countries?
No, I cannot say this question. I not know because I'm trying to understand how these people, how these articles are distributed in terms of sample. But what I saw that in Brazil, I thought that a lot of papers dedicated to sometimes that study patients, medical. People that need some medical assistance. I found this a lot of paper in Brazil, and also in child. The most of part of the papers approaching child and teenagers belongs to Brazil. But this is the only comp that I can have. I cannot have this stratify the samples and the articles. I think so. The good step to go.
May I add something to that? Because we didn't analyze the country that the paper was published in a journal from that country, because there was a lot of people from other countries in Latin America publishing in one specific country, so it wouldn't be that reliable. What would be very interesting was to analyze main authors, their affiliation, to see this concentration. But it is like a different beast in how to analyze that, but it would be definitely very interesting.
No, I think you have to distinguish between academic surveys, where you have some control on the questions, and now most people are publishing papers based on data that is available from national statistical offices. Those basically follow OECD's recommendations, the guidelines, which is like a general agreement. And then those researchers have no option, no? So it's not a decision of the researcher. The decision is to publish or not to publish with that data. And then there is no control there. It's not that they are expressing a preference on the concept or the metrics. It's that they have to publish. There is a huge pressure. And then probably academic surveys, you have more control on the questions. And I've seen academic surveys, I don't know yours, but the surveys I ran, we have all the 5 metrics, happiness, life satisfaction, country. So you have more control, and then you can explore those topics. But most people who do research are forced to use national statistical offices. And now there is convergence due to OECD's guidelines.
And one thing that I would like to comment, that I saw some presentation from Adam in another table that comparing Colombia and Bolivia. One thing that I didn't find in this database was more than one country. I think so 2% of the papers that I found using, for example, Brazil and Chile or Peru and Colombia, but was I can count on one hand that studies involving happiness and using more than one country and comparing some 2 or 3 countries. This was a very interesting because I was I will find some collaboration among the countries. No, I didn't find. So
and maybe those research projects, because they are larger, more complex, they are published outside Latin America. Because of the
yes, for sure.
Of journals.
This is a possibility, yes. Yeah. So, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.